This week, we're looking at modern photography in Germany and Russia. We will be thinking about the stylistic strategies that they employ, but we're also trying to understand how these held a political message. Our learning goals are to discuss the stylistic strategies, to analyze examples by the movement's major photographers, but also to understand the political context of modern photography in Europe. I want to take a moment to think about the term modern and what it means within art history. In terms of subject matter, modern describes subject matter that reflects 20th century life, including technology, urban development, and modern gender roles. We're particularly concerned with its style, though, of course. Stylistically, modern means a disruption of the representation of reality. Often we'll describe this as being avant-garde. Avant-garde is a French military term that describes soldiers who scout out territory ahead of the main force. But within art, avant-garde refers to experimental techniques and stylistic strategies that do not conform with established artistic norms. In terms of avant-garde photography, these artists are trying to undermine the documentary quality of photography with unexpected compositions and angles. This should remind you of straight photography, but we'll see these same strategies in modern photography. The modern photographers we're looking at this week, though, they do something straight photographers never would. They experiment with alternative photographic processes, especially messing around in the darkroom. Politically, these artists are much more leftist than the artists we encountered in the United States. In Germany, these artists are critical of the Weimar Republic and then later the National Socialist movement. In Russia, they are supportive of the new communist regime. In Europe, modern photography is often referred to as a new vision. This happens in the time between World War I and World War II. There is a lot of modern art activity during this period, or avant-garde activity. They are pursuing new photographic techniques. They are contributing to all of the political and cultural ferment that's happening. They also are collaborating actively with avant-garde movements, especially Dada and Surrealism. These photographers are very interested in machine technology. They see the camera as being kind of like the most effective visual instruments of the age because its relationship with machine technology. Artists, though, they see themselves as they are remaining true to reality in order to reveal the true face of our time. That's the theorist Gustav Hartlaub talking. But the idea is that these photographers shouldn't be concealing modern life. They should be revealing it. While we're focusing primarily on German and Russian artists this week, I want to briefly discuss Man Ray. He's born in Philadelphia, but he spends the majority of his career in Paris, and he develops a lot of experimental photographic techniques, especially rayographs. These are actually photograms, but he names them after himself. So here's an example of a rayograph in which he's laid some objects on a piece of photosensitive paper. It's hard to tell what the objects are. They might be a pipe and maybe a necklace, maybe a mushroom, but that's the point. You're supposed to not be able to tell what they are. It's more about the visual strategies here, right? The density of the print, the lines they make, their arrangement. Here is an example of another technique he developed, the solarized technique. So this is a woman lying down, but the way he's printed it gives it this aura. And this probably is one of his most famous. It's of the Countess Casati, and he double prints it so that her eyes are not lined up. And all of these, they're supposed to be disruptive. They're supposed to make you feel kind of uncomfortable or like, is this a photograph? I mean, it's not doing what photographs are supposed to do. If this is supposed to be a portrait of the Countess Casati, it's really kind of hard to even know what she looks like. So the next artist I want to talk about is Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. He is Hungarian, but he's educated in Austria, and then he serves in World War I, but then he moves to Berlin and becomes an avant-garde artist. In 1923, he becomes an instructor at the art school in Germany called the Bauhaus. This is a really important art school. They focused on training artists to produce functional objects for the modern world. And for Moholy-Nagy, he really felt like photography was the best opportunity for this. He says that it is an opportunity for individual expression, but that it is also a revelation of form and light. In 1937, he has to flee Germany because of the rise of the Nazis, but he moves to Chicago and he establishes a new Bauhaus there. So here is his experimentation with photograms. So this is similar to what we were seeing with the Man Ray earlier. I think it's interesting to look at this one in comparison with the Atkins and Dixon that we talked about earlier in the semester, because it's a similar technique, right? It's about photosensitive paper and laying objects on top of it. And even like stylistically, don't these look beautiful together? The difference is that while Atkins and Dixon are trying to inform their viewer about the details of these ferns, for Moholy-Nagy, it's almost like you can't even understand what he's put on the paper. It's just about the style. This is a photograph he took from the radio tower in Berlin, and this really like weird angle makes it difficult to even know what you're looking at. You can see we're looking down at a square in the snow, and part of it has been shoveled right along here. But it takes a while to understand that, and it's kind of about like the amazement of the modern world that you have these huge towers and spaces like this. Another important technique for these modern photographers is collage and photomontage. Collage comes from the French word coller, which means to glue, and it is a recombination of existing visual materials that you do with glue. You paste them together, and then sometimes they will photograph the result. A montage is a combination of camera images on film or photographic paper in the dark room. So the appeal here is the versatility. You can combine so many different things, but it's also very disruptive. So the one that we'll be looking at this week in the discussion is by Hannah Höch. We'll talk a lot about all the different photographic materials she combines here. All of this was recognizable newspaper photographs. And so the power of this comes from taking these recognizable images and completely changing their meanings. A very different approach to photomontage comes from John Hartfield. So this is from about a decade later. Hartfield is German, but he anglicizes his name as a way of protesting the German government. And here, this is about a peace conference in Geneva in which, according to him, no peace is achieved, right? Because we've got a dove, a sign of peace, being run through with a bayonet. So this is a photo montage. He's combining different photographic images. And while this is disruptive in its very violent message, it doesn't have the disruptive appearance that the Höch had. Here's another example from Hartfield. This is critical of Adolf Hitler. So it shows a photograph of him with like a X-ray of his body, and his spine is made up of gold. So he is criticizing Hitler as being just greedy. And finally, I want to turn to Russia. So Russia, these artists are part of the constructivist movement. They are dedicated to promoting the Bolsheviks. So the Bolsheviks are the ones who win the Russian Revolution and establish a new communist government under Lenin. These artists, they see themselves as being engineers or constructors rather than artists. They reject self-expression and fine art. Rather, they feel like artists have a material understanding that will help them to support the new government and get Russia caught up with the rest of the world in terms of its industrial complex. Lisitsky is one of the artists associated with this. This is a photo montage he makes that is a self-portrait. So it is called The Constructor, and you can see how he has layered graph paper, a compass with a hand over his face. We'll be talking about this week as well in our discussion. We'll also be talking about Varvara Stepanova. This is her collage that is celebrating the results of the first 5-year plan under Lenin. And so this was a 5-year plan that the goal was to catch Russia up with the rest of the world in terms of its industry. So this is celebrating that. Stepanova's husband, Alexander Rodchenko, was also a photographer, and many of his photographic images might remind you of street photography in the way that they have these like really closely cropped and unexpected compositions. So this is a portrait of his mother, which is just a like really, really close view of her face using her glasses. This is his portrait of the Russian painter Alexander Shvetshenko. He does a double print here, which is quite different, of course, from the straight photographers. But this is a really amazing photograph to closely look at because of the way he's layering the negatives to suggest Shvetshenko's personality. And this probably is one of his most famous photographs. It's of a chauffeur, so a driver, and it's really hard to understand what's happening in the image. So this is the lights on a car, the like chrome. And so there's the driver reflected in it, and he has a pipe in his mouth, which we see here. And then in the background, that's Rodchenko. And I feel like this is a great photograph for this quote from Rodchenko, where he says, "One has to take several different shots of a subject from different points of view and in different situations, as if one examined it in the round rather than looked through the same keyhole again and again." And I feel like this really epitomizes the way that these photographers in Europe are trying to come up with a different way of using photography that will reveal the modern world. So your assignments this week, it's a stylistic strategies discussion, but you are also writing a visual analysis paper. The rough draft is due on Sunday, and I've made a separate video about that you should go watch now.